Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinque if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Wednesday, November the 10th, and today I've got a fun show for you and something a little bit different from, unfortunately, some of the doom and gloom that we often cover on this show. And I am joined today by author Larry Lamer. Now, Larry has recently written a book that has come out called Capotes Women, a true story of love, betrayal, and a swan song of an era. It is a book about Truman Capote, about his life, and especially about the women in his life that he collected and called his swans, and ultimately the downfall of him and those swans as well. So, Larry, this is a real treat to do something that's a little bit different and a little bit more fun for me, and I'm sure for our audience to talk about. So, first, I'd love to hear just a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write about Truman Capote and his swans.
Well, Truman Capote was one of the great writers of the 20th century. He was a literary genius, and he wanted to write his masterpiece. He'd written In Cold Blood, at Breakfast at Tiffany's. That wasn't going to be his masterpiece. This was a book that was going to be called Answered Prayers, and it was about these 7 elegant, rich women and ladies in their lives. It was going to be a book like Edith Wharton wrote about the Gilded Age, or other masterpieces dealing with the rich. That was what he was going to do. But he didn't do it. He couldn't do it. He failed doing it. He betrayed these women. They wanted nothing more to do with him. He kind of dissipated with drugs and liquor. But the book sat there. So I've gone back and told the story that in a way Truman couldn't tell. I mean, I'm not Truman Capote, but I think it's a good book.
Well, and you are a New York Times bestselling author, 5 books on the New York Times bestseller list. You've written, I believe you said 18 books. So you are an experienced author. But I know you said that you didn't really set out to write about Truman Capote. That wasn't on your radar at first.
No. Look, I have a friend, Susan Zirinsky, who, if you ever saw the movie Broadcast News years ago, she's this kind of feisty, idealistic young producer. And she was a CBS all her career, and she was the first woman president of CBS News. I thought, what a good book that would make. And I went to her, and she said, I'm not really sure about this. If I can do this, if I want to cooperate or not. And I said, I'm only going to do it if you cooperate. So while I was doing my research, I read a book by David Selznick, by Paley, by William F. Paley, about William F. Paley, the founder of CBS. And I was more interested in his wife, Babe Paley, than I was in him. And I did more research, and I saw that she was one of Truman's friends. And then I learned about these women called the Swans. And I thought, what a great idea this is for a book.
You have a line in the book that I think is so interesting, and I don't have it in front of me, so don't be mad when I misquote you. But you had a line talking about Truman Capote and how he collected his swans. That's the way some people would collect Fabergé eggs, and I thought that was such an interesting line, and I thought that really kind of nailed in what we know about Truman Capote and his love of these women. Now, he wasn't interested in them romantically. He was interested in a friendship with them, and also a little bit to spy is probably not the right word, but interested in their life and to kind of peek into that life they had.
Well, that's what he was. He was a great writer. So wherever he was working. Wherever scene he was, he's observing. He had this incredible memory, and he took it all in. And one day he was going to use it. And with the swans, he'd go to a party. It wasn't enough that a woman was beautiful. It wasn't enough that she was rich. It wasn't enough that she dressed well. She had to have created this persona for herself, this incredible persona. And these women, it was a time after World War II when French dress fashions became in the United States. And these women have the time and the money to perfect themselves, to perfect their beauty, the creation. They created their beauty, and that lived and died in one generation. And that's what fascinated Truman Capote.
Truman Capote, from what probably most people know about him, was an interesting man. He had an interesting life and he had an interesting upbringing. Now, he wasn't born in Alabama, but he spent a lot of his time in South Alabama, where he made a friend that later became very famous. That's Harper Lee. They were very close. So, what do we know about his early life? I know it was a little bit tumultuous at times, and his ties to Alabama. How do you think that influenced his career? And also, what do you know about that?
Well, he was pretty much abandoned by his mother. His mother was off with other men and left him with his aunts in Monroeville, Alabama. And he's written brilliantly about that world, okay, where he grew up. And the way I see it, he came to New York when he was a teenager and went to school. He basically didn't even have a high school education. So imagine how smart he was and how self-educated that at the age of 23, he published his first novel. But he was always a child of that little town. He never got over that. And you know what? To become part of that world that he wanted to become part of, you can learn to use the word with the right knife and fork, but to be really part of that, it takes several generations. So he was always an outsider. He was an outsider. He was an outsider because he was a poor boy from a little town in Alabama. And he was an outsider because he was gay, and he knew at any moment he could be thrown out as a gay man.
Well, and that's an important point. And you talk about how, yes, he left Alabama and he went to New York, but you can't necessarily fit in that world when you have come from a place like Monroeville very easily. You can't fit in very easily, I should say. And that is because the town of Monroeville and just the entire area of South Alabama that Monroeville is located is a completely different world than the world that these swans lived in. There is probably nothing more opposite that I can think of in my mind. Do you think that played a part of Truman Capote's interest in these women?
Yeah, because it was a different world. I mean, so he was fast. He loved beauty, just loved beauty, and they were not only they beautiful, but they had these incredible homes. They had great artwork. They had yacht. He just wanted to be around them, but he wasn't going to sell out his art. That he wasn't going to do. I mean, that's what ultimately mattered to him.
Now, you write about a lot of these different swans in your book. Is there one that you were just more drawn to than the others, or one that you found the most interesting?
Wow. Well, Babe Paley is fascinating. I mean, she was one of the famous Cushing sisters. Her father was one of the greatest doctors of the early 20th century, and the mother wanted her three daughters to marry three of the richest men in the world, and that's precisely what they did. And William Paley was Babe Paley's second husband, and when she was 17, she was in an automobile accident. Her face had to be redone with plastic surgery. She lost her teeth. She wore false teeth, and she would sleep in a different bedroom than her husband. She'd get up in the morning. She'd put in her teeth. She'd put in her makeup. She'd put these incredible clothes on before she'd open that door and let her husband see her. So her life was a show from morning till night.
That sounds so sad, though. And I feel like some of these swans had similar stories where they looked so glamorous from the outside and they seemed so glamorous. And that was what drew people in, whether it was Truman Capote or any of their high rolling friends. But at the end of the day, a lot of them seem to have very sad lives.
Well, you know what? First of all, anorexia was the occupational disease of these women. They had to stay basically abnormally thin, right? They had to continue their beauty for years. If you look at my book and the photos in the book, some of these women they're in their 50s and they look like they're 25 years old. They're just absolutely gorgeous, and there was enormous price paid for that. There was a price to always present this facade wherever they went, and wherever they went, they had to look perfect. That's the way Babe Paley was. Now, hair could never be out of place. Everything had to be perfect.
And again, just the work that's put into that. It might be an image that looks so effortless of, yes, I woke up like this, as the kids say these days. But it was actually a full-time job to keep up that persona, to keep up that facade, and to keep themselves up physically.
Yeah, and because you had to do that for your husband. That's what your husband wanted. He wanted a woman like this in his arm. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he really wasn't that interested in you. Maybe he didn't really care about you, but he wanted that woman on his arm.
One person that I thought was a little bit different from some of those other swans was Pamela Churchill. Now, a woman who just, and maybe it was just the draw of her, but seemed a little bit more intent on climbing her own ladder rather than just marrying into fame and fortune. I think that she obviously did that, right? But she also seemed a little bit more driven than some of the other women and really wanting to have her own life and make a name for herself in her own right. Do you agree with that?
Well, in the Renaissance, she would have been called a courtesan. She sort of slept her way. She would only sleep with men who had money and position and would advance her. But that's what she did. I mean, it's an extraordinary life, ending up as the American ambassador in Paris. I mean, how was that possible? But that's what she did.
But she kept it going, right? She had a husband and then had another husband, had several, and would continuously climb that ladder and then also make these own feats, being the ambassador and doing these other things. So it's just very interesting to see the lives of these women and the way that they worked their way to the top and then what they did once they got to the top.
Yeah. That's what they all did that. They all had that pressure. And, with Bay Paley, according to Truman, she twice tried to commit suicide. Uh, you know, Gloria Guinness, who's one to me is one of the most fascinating ones. She was a brilliant woman. She wanted to write. She wrote a novel. She wrote a play that we're going to put on the West End in London, and her husband wouldn't let her do it. He was the one with the money and the power, and he didn't want her to spend time doing that. She did a column, an extremely interesting column for Harper's Bazaar in the early '60s, and she may well have committed suicide.
Moving a little bit from the Swans to talk about Truman Capote, do you think that his life would have taken the same turn if he was not basically brought up in Monroeville, Alabama, or in a very small town?
Well, I was brought up in a small town in upstate New York, and I consider that's one of the advantages I have. Why would I want to be another kid from New York City? Why would I mean, I always felt that when I went off to college, and so many students from New York City, and they were more sophisticated than I was, and had money that I didn't have, whatever. I consider that a benefit. And I think it was for Truman too. He had a unique background, and he employed that in his writing. He wrote wonderful books about Alabama, wonderful novellas about that.
Now, I know that again, you have written about 18 books and you have had several best-selling books on the New York Times list. But you said that this book, this Capotes Women, is a book that you have gotten glowing reviews for, and you haven't seen a bad review. How do you think that the people who are reading your books have taken Capotes Women versus some of your other works?
I don't know. Look, we've gone through a pandemic. We've gone through this obsession with politics. I think people want a break. Part of it is that it's an extremely entertaining story. These women are fascinating. It's a world that's gone. Women have changed. Life has changed. And it just takes you back into something you've never known about. I think that's what it is.
Just a little bit of a break from reality, right? A break from what we
No,
all have to face
it was
every
their,
day.
it was their reality, but it's totally different.
And something you said that I thought was so fascinating before we went live here was that the book has been especially well received and especially well read here in the South, that you've had more readers from the South than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, I don't. I'm happy about that, but I don't quite understand it because most of it. Look. There's material about Alabama and New Orleans and Truman's early life and stuff, but most of it takes place in the North, and yet, wow, it's sold extremely well.
I think that that's really interesting. I'd love to know if that trend continues. But I know we were just kind of talking about why that might be, and I think that people in the South just maybe have a little bit more, maybe not relation, but a little bit more of an idealistic view of that type of life, and can say, "Oh, look at this," and glamorize a little bit more about that type of life. So that's interesting. And I know that you've also said that independent booksellers have been a huge source of selling this book for you as well.
Yeah, I look. I think there's a literate class in the South that is very special. I mean, I had never heard. I mean, embarrassed to say this, but I'd never heard of the book, the magazine Guns and Garden, right? I'd never heard of it. And which is basically it's a Southern publication, right? Wow, they reviewed my book, and so I started reading the magazine. It's a brilliant magazine. It's just at the highest possible level, and Northerners still have many Northerners, especially Northern liberals, New Yorkers, have a very disdainful attitude toward the South, and boy, I don't have that. I mean, so much of our literature, our great writers are from the South, so much understanding, and I think that's still there today.
Well, and I like the way you say that because it's also probably a little bit of a relief to not have a book about somebody from Alabama that is trashing Alabama, right? We get that a lot, or trashing the South in general, but saying that, look, this added to my career, this added to my upbringing, and this made Truman Capote part of who he was. I think that is probably a factor there. Now, I know that you have had a lot of other books that have dealt with periods in history, but tell us a little bit about some of your other books and if you have a favorite.
Well, I wrote actually. Now, one of my books was called The Lynching, and I spent a lot of time in Alabama for that. It was the last lynching in America in 1980. Michael Donald in Mobile, Alabama. So there, I spent time in Montgomery and Mobile. I was in Birmingham, so I got to know your state and love your state and appreciate it very much at that time. But each time I tried to write about a different thing. I worked in a coal mine in West Virginia when I was a young man, and I went back and wrote a book called The Price of Justice about these two Pittsburgh lawyers and their struggle for justice against Don Blankenship, CEO of Massey Energy. That was a fascinating subject. And I'm probably best known for my trilogy on the Kennedys, the Kennedy women, the Kennedy men, and Sons of Camelot. I wrote everything but the Kennedy dogs.
Well, I would hope that would be next. It's I know I've got somebody saying that they cannot wait to get their hands on this book. I know this book is available wherever books are sold, and that is something that you can pick up an independent bookseller, excuse me. You can get it online as well. You can get it at your big box stores there too. So, Larry, I just really appreciate you being able to talk about this a little bit with us. Give us that little break that you were talking about, just from reality, a little glimpse into this life. But I have to ask you first, what is your favorite part of the book, Capotes Women?
My favorite part of the book. Well, I made one mistake in the book, okay? Because I don't like to be out front. I don't like to use the first person. And the book ends with this story about Joanne Carson, okay? And I tell the story, but I don't use the first person. And I was there. So now I have to go out and tell the story what happened. Joanne Carson was married to Johnny Carson, the Tonight Show host, and Joanne got to know him when they were living in the UN Plaza, and Truman was living there too. And Truman died in her arms. And when he died, she said that Truman told her that half of the ashes she was going to keep, the other half was to go to Jack Dunphy, Truman's longtime lover. So she kept half the ashes. And this is 1984, he died. 4 years later, I was doing a book about Johnny Carson. She called me and said that Truman said I should do this great party, the 80s counterpart of the black and white ball. But she said, you can't come because if you come, I may lose my alimony. But on that morning, she said, you can come, and you have to wear a costume, and the only costume was the executioner. So I wore the executioner, but none of the stars were at the party because they knew if they went to the party, Johnny might not have the Tonight Show. I left before midnight. After midnight, she came running out, and she'd been a thief. And the thief had stolen Truman's ashes. They'd stolen the last manuscript to Answered Prayers. A few days later, she called me and said they've returned the ashes. Well, I knew she made the whole thing up, but I went over. We got in her sports car, and drove around. And we finally went to the Westwood Memorial. And these crypts, these marble crypts, and the mortician said there were 36 of them, and Joanne said, I'd like Truman to be there. And he said, but they're all full. But she says, but Peter Lawford, the Kennedys have not paid for him. We'll take Peter Lawford out of there, and Mr. Capote could be there. So she cut a deal. She couldn't stand to lose her half of the ashes. She poured it out, and she put half of those in a Japanese glass vase, and the other half she added 100% of her dog's ashes and went back to the Western Memorial. That's what you see. It says Truman Capote, but it's a quarter of Truman Capote and 100% of her dog. And when she died, they sold off her belongings, including Truman's ashes, the quarter of his ashes, and those went for around $50,000.
Where'd they go?
I don't know who bought them, but it's probably sitting on their mantelpiece.
Well, why would you not include yourself in that story? That's a great story. Why would you not tell everybody you ever meet that?
I know. Can you imagine how dumb I am? You think I've written 18 books? I must be smart. No, I'm dumb.
Look, that would be, hello, my name is Larry. I have a great story for you. That would be my name tag.
No,
So, you know,
it's in the book. It's in the book at the ending, but it's not in the first person. The story is told, but I don't say I was there. That I don't do. And some people say, "Is this true? Did he make this stuff up?" Well, hello, I was there.
that is it's a credible source, as we call it in news, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Larry, I've loved this conversation. If you want to pick up the book, Capotes Women, A True Story of Love, Betrayal, and the Swan Song of an Era, pick it up wherever books are sold. And Larry, we will look forward to your next work because I have a feeling that at 18, you're probably not stopping yet.
I got to make a living.
Don't we all? Larry, thank you so much. Everybody watching, thank you. And we will